Great. See that we got a new message here, and you can see that there are several system messages that have come in. So anytime a texter reaches out to us, they'll say, like in this situation, hello, and they'll actually get some system messages letting them know about our privacy policy, letting them know that if they want to stop a conversation, they can text stop at any time. And another great thing, you see that the supervisor here, Teddy, has reached out and let Kira know that he's right there for her, got her back 100%, and at the same time, Kira is doing a fantastic job at sending an excellent first message. She has introduced herself, which is fantastic because until a texter gets a name from us, they just see 741741, or maybe if they've texted us before, the name of the prior counselor. And Kira has let them know that she's here to listen and support, and then she has this great tenifier that acknowledges that she has read these other messages where they wrote hello and they wrote suicide. So that way the texter knows that while they were getting system messages, Kira has read those messages and now a human has taken over. So a lot of things happen all at once here. You've got a whole team of people working to support this texter. Kira has done a really great thing here. The texter started with suicide, and she has jumped right into a risk assessment. Now, if you remember from your training, it's sometimes it can feel tricky to jump into a risk assessment. But Kira's done a great job here because she has thanked them for sharing the information, showed strength in them actually start the conversation, and then has also moved into the next phase of the ladder of risk assessment, which is asking about plan. So this is fantastic. She's able to jump in there, but she's using those good contact techniques that she learned from the first skill bite to make this all still flow like a beautiful conversation. And as we always mention, you have lots of support from the team. You have your coach who is helping you in training, but then once you're done with training, you have supervisors that are right there on the platform. And you've got these dual conversations here where Kira is able to connect with the supervisor. She knows that Teddy is watching and has an eye on this. And she's also flagged this so that Teddy knows to keep an eye on the conversation. It's coded orange, which our algorithm has picked up on the word suicide. So as soon as the conversation came in, Hira knew that it would be something to watch out for. Now, this is a great job here. Notice that in a risk assessment, it can be difficult. You can feel like perhaps you're interrogating the texter. And it's very easy to just jump into those four questions back to back to back. Well, you'll notice that Hira is actually crafting a full message here. She is acknowledging that this texter has put some thought into things, which helps to de escalate the emotion around it. And then instead of just jumping and asking, do you have a time planned as if it's some checklist on a form, she's actually phrasing it in a way that is more conversational. I'm wondering if you have a time plan. So there's no judgment there. It's simply just getting more information and keeping all of her questions open ended so the texter knows they can answer truthfully. notice that Teddy, her supervisor, has supported her and using her good contact techniques mixed in when normally you would explore more before starting a risk assessment. But this is a great process here. And now you see this as tonight after dinner when it comes to time plans. So you might be thinking, oh no, this is imminent risk. We have to call the emergency services. But this is also a good time to take a deep breath and give the texter a break from asking questions. You just asked them 4 questions in a row. So don't worry. You've got Teddy watching this, and you're in the conversation. In real life, you will have your supervisor, but we can still de-escalate this and take our time. It's just good to know that this texter is at imminent risk and has a time frame that is pretty nearby. This is a great thing that Hira has just done. This texter has shared some very intimate information. They have an idea for how they want to take their life. They have those 5 pill bottles in their room, so we know they have access. And this is a great thing that Hira was paying attention and didn't have to ask about means because they actually answered steps 2 and 3 at the same time with access, with a plan and means. And so now Hira has taken that moment to use a strength ID and with a strength ID that can actually help the texter to de-escalate. Because oftentimes the people reaching out to us have not been told that they're strong. They feel that all hope is lost. So that's a great move that Hira has done right there. So something you'll notice just now, we're in an imminent risk conversation, and we've got the supervisor there. Hira's doing amazing things, but there was that pause, and you have to get used to that. It's very easy to think that our work is always super lightning fast paced, but there will always be these times where the texter is crafting their message, and you have these pauses. And Hira's done a great thing by using that time to connect Teddy. Teddy advised her to go ahead and flag that conversation, so she clicked on the flag button, and you'll see that she was able to acknowledge that this was an imminent risk conversation. The other option was mandatory report, but this is an imminent risk conversation, and then she checked off that she's done all 4 steps of that risk assessment, which is very important because that, when we're reaching out to our partnering emergency services, they're going to need to know that we've done all these steps to find out as much as we can about the texter situation should we need to reach out. So you'll notice that Hira has a downloaded attachment, Grammarly, and that's really great because we want to watch our grammar and our spelling because these aren't just regular text conversations that you might have with a friend where, K, thanks, LOL, those things are sufficient. Using full sentences and grammar and correct spelling elevates these conversations so that this person in crisis knows that they are with someone who's there to support them, and it gives us a bit of an elevated stance. And you'll also notice that in her crafting these carefully thought out sentences, there are times when what you want to say is longer than 160 characters, and so you would want to split that up into 2 messages. And she's done a beautiful thing where in the first message, she wrote 1 out of 2, and then the second one, 2 out of 2. So that way, when the texter gets the message, they're cut off in the middle of a sentence, they know that there's more coming. and those full, longer messages, once again, adds to the credibility that we have as crisis counselors. It's a really great point that Teddy has raised. Just because it's imminent risk, as we said before, does not mean we immediately have to call the emergency services. We can still give the texter space to explore and help de-escalate after a risk assessment. But he's keeping his eye on it because we have flagged that. And so he also acknowledged and showed a strength ID with Hira that her validation was great. So this type of language works full circle. This is great here, where Hira is sort of taking a stance with the texter and saying, I hear you, I get that. It doesn't sound like he had the right to tell other people what you're doing. I always like to imagine that I'm sitting on a couch with the texter, so it's not, them talking to someone, like an authority figure that they have to hide information from. It's like two people talking this out side by side. And so that's really great what she's doing. Understanding, reading between the lines, that this texter is kind of upset about having personal information shared with someone. So this is great. Hira has more to say. And so she's broken up this message. I also find that it really helps if you do need to spill over to a second message, breaking it up in the middle of the sentence, so it's very clear that you do have more to say. And she already knows what she's going to say to finish up that sentence, so it's not as much of a gap between the two messages. This is great. I like seeing how Hira and Teddy are working together, where the texter has mentioned one of their coping skills, and we can use that as transition into getting them safe and then collaboratively problem solving. In your risk assessment skill bite, you may want to immediately get them away from the pills, but keep in mind that you can keep exploring, and what's more effective than we may realize is just keeping that conversation going, because that's why the texter is reaching out. They need someone to hear them and communicate with them. And so Hira has been doing a great job of using her good contact techniques to support and create rapport with the texter, so that then when it comes to safety planning and collaborative problem solving, you're going to have a much higher chance of having a collaborative texter. Teddy makes a great point. Their plan is for later tonight, so even though the pills are right in the room with them, they've already said that their plans are to use it later. So we do have a bit of a window to de-escalate, even though their timeline is within 24 hours. And this is something great to notice that Teddy is there to support Hira in supporting the texter, but you both have the same goal. You're both aiming to keep this texter safe and work with them. So at times you may get a wish, not just pluses, but even a wish from your supervisor. And this is all to make the conversation as good as it can be. So we're always continually learning and modifying. And so it's great to incorporate any feedback you're getting from the supervisor because we're always refining what we're doing and making our skills the best that we can. And Teddy's made a great point. While meant with the greatest of intentions, when Hira said, I get that, having a second opinion there and seeing that getting into the habit of saying I can actually take the focus away from the texter and their needs and you as a crisis counselor. A really great point. I is probably one of the most used words in the human language. And we as crisis counselors, by paying attention to those things and doing everything we can to keep the entire focus on the texter and their feelings, that is where we can stand out from their friends or family members who probably respond to everything with I, which shows that they're just looking at things from their perspective and taking on this note that Teddy has suggested really fast because the texter realize it, but what they're hearing is someone agreeing with them and siding with them and looking through their eyes, which is fantastic. Now, in higher intensity conversations, the back, like in your introductory message, when you share your name and say, would you like to share yours? Here they're talking about suicide. We want to go ahead and make sure we address that because once again, that shows that the focus is on them, starting with information that we need. So this is a great time that she has, built up some rapport and talking and she's been using her good contact techniques. And now in the middle of safety planning and collaborative problem solving, she can gently ask if they would like to share their name. And it's great. She said, if you'll be willing to share, may I ask your name? So it's still in a way where it's all about the texter. While it's great for us to know the name, it doesn't come off like you have to give me your name. Because after all, we are a confidential service. So if someone doesn't want to give us their name, it's totally fine. But we have a name now. His name is Charlie. And now that it just adds another personal touch to the conversation. Charlie knows that he's talking with Hira. Hira knows that he's talking with Charlie. So This is great. Here, here it is showing that she's keeping a running tally of what they've been talking about. This isn't just responding to the last message, and she's not just thinking about, okay, what's the best thing to say next, or what am I supposed to say next? It's a rolling conversation. They've come to this moment of moving into collaborative problem solving, and she's kind of reflecting. Hey, you've talked about your family. You mentioned your brother, and then getting more into their support system, and that is just a pro move, because when a texter hears you then bring up something that they mentioned 20 minutes ago, they know that you're actually listening to them. The other great thing about this is that this is a gradual transition. So you notice we've gone through several stages of this conversation. There was the introduction, and then we went to a risk assessment, then went back into exploring, which we hadn't done yet. And now we're moving into the collaborative problem solving. It can be very difficult. You may wonder, when do we identify a goal? But here, with them being an imminent risk, the goal is to de-escalate them and find more coping skills. So don't feel that you always have to specifically ask, what is your goal for this conversation? And so we smoothly moved through these five steps of the conversation. And we've been talking a while, so knowing that talking to family is something that might be helpful, and you've been exploring their relationship with their brother. These are all things that will turn into kind of clues for what might work for coping skills and ways to de-escalate from the feelings of wanting to take their life. Now, this is great here. Here is reading between the lines. They've mentioned the brother and how they're important to them, but then, you can kind of put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel if somebody had shared some private information that you might not have wanted to share with someone else? So, she can tell that that might bring up doubt, so she can kind of step into their shoes and talk about what they may be feeling. And this is still all very open. She has not told them how they feel or what they should do. This is just kind of going through where they might be emotionally. Another thing to notice here is that a couple of these times, has gotten short messages back. She is sending these multiple messages full of good contact techniques and then getting short one word messages back. But yet she continues to keep digging and building rapport. And that is a strong move. It's very easy to start to mirror your texter, and if they send you a short message, then you start to send other short messages, or then become concerned and start asking more and more questions. And here, Kira was able to send an entire message, and there's no question in there. And then once again, responds with another beautiful message, but without asking another question. It's not always necessary for you to ask questions to get a response or to find out more information. Sometimes just sharing and using those good contact techniques will open up the floor for the texter to feel comfortable saying more. It's a great point made by Teddy there that if you have a typo here and there, that's totally fine. You know, we all make mistakes, that makes us human, but we definitely want to aim for overall using those full professional messages, because once again, that's going to distinguish us from every other conversation that this person has probably had via text, because most people do not write full sentences via text. So that is a great point. Now, as you notice, I was talking about the short messages from the texter, and here it's keeping those messages meaty, and then we got this long message back from the texter because we've been keeping the floor open for them to share with us. This is a great example of the benefit of having your supervisor as another set of eyes on the conversation, because they can see things that, with you being in the conversation and trying to, walk this texter through to a cool calm, you can do things that we've been taught not to do in training and not realize that that has even happened. So Teddy has brought up the point that Ira has used a maximizer, and those aren't always the best way of sharing a thought. Using strong feeling words, we've found to be more successful. And this is just a great tip that he's brought up. And once again, is to make Ira better and make the conversation better so that we have the best result we can. Now, this is great. This texter has shared that their uncle might be someone that they feel close to, and Hira has once again used this beautiful message to validate them, support them, and then just left the floor open for them to share more about that relationship. Instead of just jumping and saying, great, go talk to your uncle. It's tell me more about that. When you find things that the texter finds supportive that they can lean into, it's good to get them talking about that a bit, because it can actually lead to them taking the wheel and driving the conversation towards what they feel will be their next best step. So you notice it says the text of this message was 2 minutes ago. And so once again, texting is asynchronous. So we aim to respond in 2 minutes to our texter, but you don't know what's happening on the other end. The texter could be, at a family event. If they're, I don't know, their house could be 2 floors. So if they're in their room, maybe they went downstairs to talk to someone and left their phone upstairs, or any number of things could happen. And so you'll notice that there may be times where you're having this great conversation and then there's this pause and you don't know what's happening, or you're in the middle of what seems like an imminent risk conversation, and then there's this gap. And this is actually great that this has been time that Teddy has been able to jump in and support Ira as a counselor, and it also has turned into a learning moment. That's great. Over time, you will start to feel more and more confident as you get more conversations and different situations happen. This is also a great example that even though a conversation starts off talking about suicide, just take a deep breath and work through the process. We have the lateral risk assessment. You get your good contact techniques. The conversation doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go into an active rescue immediately. Teddy has done a great job here of the same way we like to empower our texters. He's actually taken a moment to empower Hira and just letting her know that anytime she needs to reach out to whoever her supervisor is, she can. But then we also have a toolbox on the platform. So if she is feeling rusty, she can go in there and brush up on things and continue her education without having to be in the middle of a high risk conversation. This is a great thing that Hira is checking in on. It's been 6 minutes since our texter last reached out, and so she's checking in with her supervisor to see what she should do. And this is going to happen. There are times where you just got a gap in the conversation, and then there's other times where perhaps, like I said before, the texter could have gone downstairs or something. So you want to check in and see what your texter, if the texter is actually disengaged. And Teddy's made a great point. We'll wait about 7 minutes, and then he gave her great language. Haven't heard from you in a little while. And also letting them know that if they want to keep talking, they can. And it leaves the power in the texter's hands. Hira had made a comment to Teddy earlier in their conversation that she doesn't feel like she's alone in doing this, and that's so true. You've got your supervisor there in the conversation, but then also you've got support chat, which you'll be able to talk with other CCs. So if you do have a question like, seems like my text is not responding, or I'm getting short answers, whatever the concern may be, you can always reach out to the other crisis counselors that are on the shift at the same time. So this is great. So you'll see that here has scrolled back up and is reviewing the conversation. And that's actually a great practice to keep because, like I said before, it's great to think of it as a holistic conversation and not just responding message to message. And you'll see here that the texter said, I'm okay, my sister needed me, she had a breakup. So once again, this texter is in crisis themselves, but you never know what's happening around the texter. And so they put their phone down, got distracted with something else. And so instead of just closing the conversation thinking that they left, we were checked in, and then we were able to see what actually happened. And you want to make that a practice if you haven't heard none of it, to do a check-in with the texter. Distractions like that are also a great time to do what Kira has just done, to check in, see how they're feeling. If someone has gotten distracted or started doing something else, perhaps they're not in that heated moment anymore, and they might not need our support, and they can move on with their own coping skills. And that was great that Kira she hasn't asked, are you feeling better? She just said, hey, just checking in, like, where are you? How are you feeling now that we've been chatting for a while? And that's a really great way of putting it so that the texter can respond openly about how they feel as opposed to just answering a question of feeling better or not, because they might not feel better, but they might not need to continue texting. As you can see here, they were honest with this. They're not feeling very well. And something else to remember while we're on the topic of texters not responding. So, for instance, with this texter, they had answered affirmatively to all 4 questions in the ladder up risk assessment. And had they disengaged from us and we don't hear back from them, but we can't confirm that they're safe and that they have a safety plan, then the supervisor can still decide to call local emergency services because they are at imminent risk and we don't know that they're safe. Or if we don't hear back and it was low risk, then we can close that conversation out and still remind them that we're here 24/7 should they need our help again. So that way, if they do get back to their phone, it's been 40 minutes and they've been caught up with the sister going through the breakup, they see that we closed the conversation because they weren't there, but they can still re-engage. So you're closing it off with that warm conclusion that we talk about. And here's doing a really great job of validating the texter. They're not feeling really well, not feeling any better, and letting them know that that's normal, that's okay. And then also went back to the last, as she was reviewing, went back to their last mode of support that we know about. So revisiting the idea of an uncle, that maybe they can turn to that uncle for support. Because once again, we're an immediate support intervention, but we want to empower that texter so that should they have another crisis, they kind of have a toolbox of things to go to. So that's why we're exploring if they can talk to the uncle. It's not because we don't want to talk to them, but the uncle knows their situation, we don't. They don't have to re-explain themselves, and they already have years of rapport built up with the uncle, whereas we've just been talking for, I don't know, half an hour or so. Now, Teddy makes a great point here, talking about their supports. friends, family, things like that is a great way to also segue into coping skills. All of that is a part of collaborative problem solving. You're finding out what supports they have, but then using that to also find ways that um, their own coping skills that will empower them with a good plan. Like I said before, we want to empower them with the tools they'll need to get through the crisis, not just now, but in case it happens again. If you have a texter who has anxiety or something that can flare up repeatedly, we don't want them to then become dependent on crisis text line. We want to give them tools that they can try first. And this is great to hear is actually mirroring their language. We talk in training about the difference between mirroring and parroting. And here, just using that snippet of their phrasing, slightly paraphrased, they said shake it off, and then she is validating and saying brush it off. And so it's still reflecting that same sentiment, which is excellent for building rapport. And once again, not responding with questions, just using a really strong, good contact technique, and then that allows the texter to direct the conversation. When we ask too many questions, then it becomes an interview. It's all about the information we need from them, as opposed to just being supportive and letting them take the conversation to the next direction. And we use our 5 stages of the conversation as kind of a framework, so we know how to guide them through the conversation. We know what stages we need to go through. We have to explore and then find out, what their goal is. And then we work together to collaborate. So that's just a framework, but the texter is actually in the driver's seat the entire time. There's a great thing to notice here. The supervisor, Teddy, while he's actually been very attentive here, he's also got several other conversations happening. Our supervisors are keeping an eye on numerous conversations, and that's another reason that it's great to know that you have your toolbox and you have support chat. And so there's several places that you can go to get information. And yeah, this is great. Once again, here is using a strong, meaty message to respond back, using the 1 out of 2 slash mark so that the texter knows there's more coming, and also reflecting what she's hearing. So once again, we're kind of recapping what it is that the texter is sharing with us so that A, they feel heard, but also it gives them a chance to, see what they have been sharing with us so that they can actually look at their situation objectively, which they might not have been able to do. So by us saying, what I'm hearing is that you want to be understood, not feel attacked. Seems like this has been happening repeatedly. They can actually look at their situation outside of themselves and either decide, oh yeah, this is exactly what it is, and then they can collaborate with us on how to cope with that and work through that. Or they can see that and go, well, no, that's not it at all, and then correct us. But we can do that without questions, without asking a question in every single message. And here is also asked how they've coped with that in the past. because it seems like it's happened before. So we're wondering, all right, well, what have you done before? So we've explored their support system, so that's the people around them, the who. I always like to look at the who and the what. So she's explored the who, who's around them, and now the what have they done? We know one of them has been smoking because the brother told someone about that, and that tends to be a coping skill for many people. And while we don't like condone it, we can actually address the emotion of that. So you can say it's understandable that you would want relief from this stress, blah 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 blah, without saying smoking's bad, don't do that, because we want to address the emotional life of the texter. And once again, you see that there's another pause in the conversation here. As I said before, this happens. It's asynchronous. We already know that the texter's sister was going through a breakup, and so we already know that there's several things happening in this texter's life at this given moment. So this is a great thing to keep in mind. We checked in with that texter earlier because we hadn't heard from them, and this could happen several times in a conversation. And that is why we always check in several times, because once again, we don't know what's happening, what else is happening with the texter, and we want to check in. But then also, it's kind of a clue sometimes if they're disengaging frequently, then they actually might not be in the heated moment anymore, might not be at a cool calm, but in those times you can actually, if it seems to happen frequently, ask if this is the best time for them to be texting. Here's being really compassionate here, and just once again just saying, hey, I haven't heard from you in a few minutes, but I'm still here. We let them know that we are still here. We're 24/7, we're always here. And so this is a really great move of hers. And when you're on the platform, during times like this, as a level one, when you are taking one conversation at a time, we have things like the toolbox and the chat rooms, and those are times where you can reach out to others and use that time. Keeping your eye on the conversation, but that could be a time where, say, so we got a message from the texter. If you're working with a texter who maybe has, a very specific concern, they're talking about an eating disorder, anxiety, and you may think that the texter might benefit from some longer term care, then that's a good time to, look in the referrals database or look around in the toolbox for some tips. And that way you're kind of preparing yourself for anything else that might come up. And this is great. Here is giving what they've said some very strong emotion. Their emotions, and they say they don't talk to anyone; they just self harm. And she's expanding on that. Sounds like what she's hearing by that is you use it to release all of your emotions that you bottled up inside. That's painting a bigger picture than just, oh, okay, you self harm. She's getting to the emotions behind that. And another great thing to note is that here's been a crisis counselor with us for a while, but even she is crafting these messages. It's not, she doesn't just know exactly what to say, type it, send it. She deletes, she edits. She really takes the time to make sure that she's sending a full message. And she's using a good contact technique in every message, which is fantastic. And here, once again, without putting any judgment on self-harm, she's kind of like opening up this door, like it sounds like this might not be something you want to continue. They don't have necessarily a positive. Then some of they're speaking about this in a positive way. So once again, she didn't ask any questions. She's just putting some thoughts out there, being very warm, and this leaves the texter in the driver's seat to tell us what they feel about the situation. He makes a great point. They've been distracted. They're dealing with some other things. And he says he's betting they're feeling heard, and might not be ready to really talk coping skills. You're going to notice that with some of our texters that reach out, and you may even get a texter who disengages and text stop once you start getting into the collaborative problem solving. And that's because, frankly, some people, when they text in, they're not texting in because they're ready to fix the problem. They just want to be heard, and that's what they need. So by us exploring, they're getting what they reached out for. And then we move into the collaborative problem solving. That's beyond what they're ready for. And they may disengage or close the conversation or say, like this texter, just a lot happening at once, but I'm okay. They'll start to brush things off. But the ones who are ready and are happy that someone wants to talk it through with them, you notice that they will collaborate with you. And here is making a gracious invitation here, thanking them for clarifying. Notice we got their name a while ago, but then we didn't just use it all the time. So she's been very strategic in using that name here to once again generate rapport. And then I said, I'm here to work with you. So once again, the invitation is there, not demanding that they collaboratively problem solve with us. And basically letting them know that if they want to keep going into this next phase, we're here for them. Teddy makes a really great point too, that it's not just about them feeling better. We want them to find relief and stay safe because they're at imminent risk. So if we don't know that they have a safety plan, we will probably end up having to reach out. But here here is making it clear. We want to find them relief tonight, but also make sure that they're safe. Oh, that's a great question here. High risk and imminent risk could be two different things. Oh, a question that we get sometimes is, can a texter tell when we're typing? Like you get those three little dots on your phone. And no, the texter cannot tell that. We have that capability here with when you're messaging, if you're direct messaging another crisis counselor or talking to your supervisor, you can see when they're typing, but our texters cannot. Now this is great. The texters laid out 3 different coping skills that they have. And Teddy has given us a great definition of the difference between high risk and imminent risk. You can see there. Imminent risk, we're explicitly working to the safety plan because they've checked off all 4 of those boxes of our ladder risk assessment. And high risk, like you said, we're going to work with them to come up with a safety plan and coping skills. It makes a great point when it comes to a high risk texter. You just want to ultimately really be there for them and work collaboratively on their on problem solving with them. And this is excellent what Hira has done here. She's actually very strategic with her questions. You notice before she asked what they could do to stay safe tonight, and then in this next message, after they mentioned their current coping skills, she's validated those and actually shown great strength there, and then asked if any of those things could help out tonight. And so once again, her question isn't directing the conversation to gathering information. They're actually questions that are further opening the door for the texter to explore and share. It's a great clarification from Teddy. That with high-risk conversation, we'd be required to contact. With imminent risk conversation, we would be required to contact the local EMS if we can't develop a safety plan. It's a great distinction. Now you're going to have this a lot, where a texter shares, a litany of things that they do, and then you ask if that would help tonight, and then they say, "No, I don't think so." Or you ask them, what are their hobbies? What do they do for fun? And they just say, nothing. Nothing works. I don't have any hobbies. Nothing's fun. And that can be difficult. But Hira is a pro. She's jumping right into this, once again, normalizing the situation. They're preoccupied with cutting. That's where the mind goes. So even entertaining the idea of doing something that they normally find joy with might be difficult. And so she keeps exploring here, and we don't not passing any judgment on that or forcing them to do those things. It's just keeping the door open. And that's great. This side conversation here happening with the supervisor, contacting the local EMS is a last resort. Remember, we aim to bring someone from a heated moment to a full calm. And so just because something is imminent risk does not mean, okay, great, gotta call the police. Many times we can actually still de-escalate. You always want to work with them. I'm just reading what Teddy is saying, empowering them to de-escalate the situation and stay safe, but still getting relief from whatever's going on. And that's a great statistic there, that less than 1% of our combos ever go to active rescue. And that's something to keep in mind. Well, yes, we are crisis intervention support. There's still a small fraction of our conversations that end up requiring an active rescue. But this texter is doing great. Here has acknowledged the 3 other coping skills that they mentioned, and then has opened the door to say, well, is there anything else that's going on? And then they mentioned drawing. So this is great. They're actually interacting with us. And whether you feel like it or not, a lot of times in these situations, you've got them thinking about something besides their idea of taking their life or self-harm or cutting or any other destructive thoughts that they're having. So that's a great win. Just even the collaborative problem solving, getting them thinking about other things and other activities. Once again, the short answer is they can throw us off, but you keep using those good contact techniques and you see what happens. You messaging those full messages actually shows the texter that you're engaged in the conversation. And while they may be short for words, or sometimes if they're in despair, you just got these short answers because they don't feel like anything's really going to help. But consistently using those long messages shows that you're engaged in the conversation. You're there for them, whether or not they're feeling it or not. They're gonna respond to that. And this is great. Here, it's coming back with a nice strength ID and actually asking them if they'd be willing to brainstorm. She's not telling them, hey, I think we should do this, or this is what we're going to do now. Let's brainstorm and do this. Cool and calm demeanor, and saying, hey, would you be willing to brainstorm some other ideas? Because they've thrown some things out and in the door to work with them. Hard thing to do. They mentioned their uncle, they mentioned these great, and it's easy for your instinct would be to jump on those things. Great, go talk to your uncle. Your uncle's family. He loves you. You can't say those things because you don't know their situation. You can't paint things into the conversation that aren't there. But keeping that conversation going and having them talk about those things and throw those things out there is important. And here's this message: different things work for different people. That's great. So that way the texter knows that this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. She's not just some script. It's it's all about them and what works for them. And the way this is something interesting. So with making we'll get caught up on advice giving and collaborating, and here telling the texter, draw on your skin with a washable marker where you want to cut. Some people have done this before. What do you think about that? Now that's not advice giving because the texter has the full agency to reject that idea, or like in this situation, say, I never thought of that. Maybe that could work. Actually give it a try. And once again, this is a great thing here. She hasn't asked them, are you feeling better? She just said she wanted to check in on how they're feeling. So it doesn't mean there's no weight on that. It's simply a check-in. this is great. This is a really great point that Kira is bringing up. I've said this several times because it's something I always have to remind myself. You can't fix the texter's problem. For instance, if you're talking with someone about grief, you can't bring that person back. So they may not feel better at the end of the conversation, but still having someone there that is being supportive of them is going to make a huge difference for them. And here is letting them know that it's okay not to feel 100%. And sometimes, if the texter is going through depression or anxiety or anything like that, that's exactly what they need to hear, is that it's okay to feel the way that they feel. And also to remind yourself that our goal is to bring them to a cool calm, not to make them feel better and have them doing cartwheels. Once again, you see here sculpting her message and actually taking her time to think about what she's saying. We always aim to respond in 2 minutes, but that doesn't mean you have to rush through and answer really quickly and have a perfect answer as fast as you can. It's not fast food. She is taking her time to send a full meaty message that's well thought out. She's supporting the texter, using a good contact technique in every message, but also keeping in the back of her mind what stage of the conversation she's in and what's coming up next. So here we've been collaborating for a bit. They have several things they've done before. They've come up with a new thing. I always try to discover at least one new thing that they can do that they can try. And here she's kind of leading towards, hey, well, how about we just give this thing a try? Keep in mind, crisis text line, we're around 24/7. So if the texter does need to text back in later on, or they find themselves, feeling that they need us again in a week or 2 weeks, they can text us again. But we can get to that immediate crisis and get them empowered to give a new coping skill a try. So this is great. The texter said that they would try drawing, something they hadn't heard of before. So that's great. And here's checking in with her supervisor about what she can say. And concluding conversations can be very difficult. I remember when I first started, that was kind of the hardest part, because a lot of times the people are still in their crisis, but we brought them to a cool calm. And what I have to remind myself is that in the heated moment, it's hard to make a decision about what to do next. But getting them to that cool calm helps clear their mind so that they can make their next step. And so, like she said, she doesn't want to feel like she's pushing them off, because they're still at imminent risk. But now we've safety planned with them, and they've agreed to give something a try. And so it can feel a bit odd sometimes to then start to wrap up and say, okay, all right, well, I'll let you go do that thing. And her supervisor said the same exact thing. It's great. You're not abandoning them. And that's great. You checked up all the boxes. You de-escalated them. Great. They're at a cool calm. You've identified a good coping skill and coping strategy, so they have an activity to do tonight to stay safe. And like you said, it's logical. You've empowered them to embrace what you've both collaborated on. And this is excellent, because this texter started in talking about suicide. We were able to de-escalate them, and it shows how just because they were at imminent risk, it doesn't mean that it's automatically going to become an active rescue. This is great. This has been a really great conversation. The texters agreed to give that a try. We've let them know that we're here 24/7. And once we close up a conversation warmly, the way Hira is doing, this texter is going to receive a link and has a survey that they can fill out. And the data that they share there is what powers our website, crisistrends.org. So anything you are seeing there where we're sharing data about our texters and their issues and demographics, those are things that they have shared with us. And this is great. That's a great message that Hira has ended on. And if you keep in mind, if this person has a smartphone, anytime they go back to text 741-741, if they want to reach back out to us or even just revisit the conversation, your last message is going to be the lasting impression of the organization. And that's great that she's offered such great support. Let them know it was a pleasure talking with them. It wasn't a burden with us at all. And she's closed the conversation warmly. That's fantastic. And now she's going to have some self-care and eat some ice cream. She's done some really great work here. And, it's a lot of emotional labor. And so she's ended her shift and she's going to take care.